What would have driven a woman who once inspired students to turn into the orchestrator of a massacre? This is the chilling tale of betrayal, revenge, and a night New York would never forget. In the crowded streets of New York, where life moved at an unrelenting pace, no one could have suspected the storm in the heart of 45-year-old Eleanor Marks. To her students and colleagues at St. Francis Academy, Eleanor was a dedicated and disciplined English teacher. She lived alone in a modest apartment in Queens, filling her evenings with lesson planning and stacks of essays. Yet, beneath the surface of her seemingly ordinary life was a deep well of anger, resentment, and loss that would one day erupt into unimaginable violence. Eleanor's life had not been easy. Growing up as the eldest of 5 siblings in a working-class family, she learned responsibility at an early age. Her parents, factory workers, were often absent, leaving Eleanor to care for her younger siblings. She had dreams of becoming a writer, but life took a different course. Her family's financial struggles forced her to put her dreams aside, and she pursued a teaching career instead, sacrificing personal ambition for stability. By the time she reached her 40s, she had grown accustomed to the quiet monotony of her life, convincing herself that her work shaped young minds and made the world a better place. But everything began to change when Eleanor became the target of a cruel conspiracy at the school. A small group of students, privileged, arrogant, and with influential parents, found entertainment in tormenting her. At first it was minor pranks, chalk dust in her desk, notes mocking her appearance, whispers behind her back. Eleanor dismissed it as the folly of youth, determined to maintain her composure. However, the harassment escalated. The students circulated false rumors accusing Eleanor of inappropriate behavior, which reached the ears of the school administration. Though the accusations were baseless, the damage to her reputation was swift and severe. Eleanor's colleagues grew distant, and her friends began avoiding her. Parents complained, demanding her resignation, and the school board launched an investigation that placed her career in jeopardy. The betrayal from her workplace, combined with the public humiliation, became too much to bear. She was forced to take an unpaid leave while the investigation ran its course, leaving her isolated and financially strained. Her savings dwindled, and the walls of her small apartment seemed to close in on her. The despair that consumed her turned into a smoldering rage, her thoughts circling the names and faces of those she blamed for her misery. Months of isolation hardened Eleanor into someone unrecognizable. She spent her days compiling a meticulous list of everyone she held accountable: the students who started the rumors, their indulgent parents, the teachers who turned their backs on her, and the administrators who failed to defend her. Each name was etched in her mind, each face fueling her growing determination. To the outside world, Eleanor had vanished, but in her solitude, she was planning something that would leave an indelible mark on the city. The day Eleanor was officially dismissed from her position was a turning point. She received the letter from the school in the middle of December, just weeks before Christmas. Snow blanketed the streets, and festive decorations adorned every corner of the city. But for Eleanor, the holiday season was meaningless. With the letter crumpled in her fist, she sat in the dim light of her apartment, staring at the empty walls, her mind filled with the weight of her loss and her hunger for justice. It was on that cold December evening that Eleanor decided she could no longer be a victim. In her eyes, the world had taken everything from her, and she would take something back. Eleanor Marks began her plan with precision. She had always been methodical, a trait that had made her an excellent teacher. In the weeks following her dismissal, she turned her small apartment into what could only be described as the headquarters of a calculated campaign for vengeance. Stacks of papers, maps, and photographs cluttered every surface, each carefully marked and annotated. These were the faces and names of her perceived enemies, the students, their parents, the administrators, and a few colleagues who had sided against her. Every detail she could gather about their routines, habits, and weaknesses was meticulous. Her first target was the ringleader of the students who had started it all, Dylan Hayes. Dylan was the charismatic son of a wealthy real estate mogul, known for his charm and sharp tongue. He had led the charge against Eleanor with a smug confidence, knowing that his family's influence would protect him from any consequences. Eleanor despised him with a burning intensity. She began shadowing him, noting the times he left for school, the places he frequented with his friends, and the parties he attended. She watched from a distance, careful not to draw attention to herself. But Eleanor didn't stop there. She researched his family, learning about their businesses and personal lives. She found out where his father, Richard Hayes, worked and where his mother, Charlotte, spent her afternoons shopping or at charity events. Eleanor's anger extended beyond Dylan to the entire family, whom she saw as emblematic of the privileged class that had trampled over her. Eleanor's second target was Principal Mitchell Cartwright, the man who had spearheaded the investigation into her alleged misconduct. She had trusted him once, believing he respected her years of dedication to the school. But when the rumors began, he had been quick to side with the parents, eager to avoid controversy. He had suspended her without pay and left her to fend for herself against the baseless accusations. To Eleanor, his betrayal was unforgivable. She followed him as well, learning his routines and noting the days he stayed late at the school or visited his country club. As winter turns to spring, Eleanor's obsession deepens. She spent hours each day preparing, reading about chemicals, weapons, and any tools she might need. Her internet searches grew more specific, though she took care to cover her tracks, aware of the risks of being discovered too soon. She even purchased items in small quantities, scattered across different stores, to avoid suspicion. In her mind, she was building a masterpiece of retribution, one piece at a time. Her targets weren't limited to the students and staff. Eleanor also focused on a handful of parents who had been particularly vocal in their condemnation of her. People like Lisa Thompson, a mother who had spearheaded a petition to have Eleanor removed from her position, were added to the list. Lisa had painted Eleanor as a danger to the children, turning other parents against her. With exaggerated tales of misconduct, Eleanor couldn't forget the venom in Lisa's words during a PTA meeting where her fate was discussed. By May, Eleanor had finalized her plan. She planned to strike during the annual spring gala hosted by the school, a lavish event attended by students, parents, and staff. It was the perfect opportunity to ensure that every name on her list was in one place. The gala had always been a source of pride for St. Francis Academy, a symbol of its prestige and unity. Eleanor intended to shatter that image in the most dramatic way possible. She spent the weeks leading up to the gala acquiring the final pieces she needed. Her actions became more erratic, her mind consumed by the details of her plan. She hardly slept, surviving on coffee and the sheer adrenaline of her escalating anger. Her neighbors began to notice her strange behavior, but Eleanor kept to herself, avoiding unnecessary interactions. To those who saw her in passing, she was simply a quiet, reclusive woman. No one could have guessed the storm brewing within her. On the night of the gala, Eleanor dressed carefully. She chose a dark, understated outfit that would allow her to blend into the background. Her appearance was unremarkable, ensuring that no one would give her a second glance as she made her way to the venue. She arrived early, slipping into the crowd of caterers and decorators setting up for the evening. No one questioned her presence. She was just another face in the sea of activity. The event began with the usual fanfare. Guests arrived in elegant attire, mingling and exchanging pleasantries. The grand hall was adorned with shimmering lights and floral arrangements, the air filled with the sound of laughter and music. Eleanor observed it all from the shadows, her heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and dread. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Susongolo. As the evening progressed, Eleanor moved through the crowd, her gaze fixed on her targets. Dylan Hayes was there, surrounded by his friends, his signature smirk plastered across his face. His parents were nearby, chatting with Principal Cartwright and Lisa Thompson. The sight of them together filled Eleanor with a cold determination. She had spent months envisioning this moment, and now it was finally here. Her plan was simple but devastating. She had planted small improvised devices throughout the venue earlier in the day, hidden among the decorations and equipment. Each device was designed to cause chaos and panic, ensuring that her targets would be unable to escape unscathed. She had also brought a concealed weapon, prepared for any contingency. If you're enjoying this story, don't miss out on the next shocking true crime documentary we're about to reveal. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a twist like this again. As the clock neared 9 p.m., Eleanor took her position near the exit, her finger hovering over the remote that would set everything into motion. She took a deep breath, her mind racing with thoughts of justice, revenge, and the life she had lost. The room around her seemed to blur, the faces of her targets sharp and vivid against the backdrop of her fading sand. With one final glance at the scene before her, Eleanor pressed the button, unleashing a chain of events that would forever change the lives of everyone in that room. When Eleanor Marks pressed the button, chaos erupted instantly. The first explosion was small, but enough to create a shattering sound that echoed through the grand hall. Guests turned toward the source, confusion etched on their faces as the elegant evening shattered into fragments of panic. Glass rained down from an ornamental chandelier, and the music faltered, replaced by gasps and the sound of hurried footsteps. The second device detonated moments later, this time near the banquet tables. Flames licked the edges of the cloth-covered tables, igniting the ornate decorations. Screams pierced the air as people began to realize that this wasn't an accident. Parents shielded their children, and staff members tried to maintain order, but the atmosphere quickly descended into terror. Eleanor stood near the exit, watching her plan unfold. Her targets were easy to spot amidst the chaos. Dylan Hayes was huddled with his friends, his expression finally devoid of the smugness that had haunted Eleanor's dreams. Principal Cartwright stumbled toward the doors, barking orders that no one seemed to hear. Lisa Thompson clung to her husband, her face pale with fear. Eleanor felt a grim satisfaction, her chest tightening with a toxic mix of anger and vindication. But Eleanor's plan wasn't finished. As people scrambled toward the exits, she moved through the crowd with eerie calmness. Her weapon, concealed beneath her coat, felt heavy in her hand as she advanced toward her first target. Dylan Hayes was close, his back turned as he tried to lead his friends to safety. Eleanor closed the distance between them with deliberate steps, her pulse racing. The shot rang out, silencing the room for a brief moment. Dylan fell to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. His friends screamed, their voices blending with the already deafening noise. Eleanor didn't stop to savor the moment. She turned her attention to Principal Cartwright, who was now frozen in place, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Eleanor!" His voice trembled as he recognized her. The sound of her name from his lips only fueled her fury. Another shot echoed through the hall, and Cartwright crumpled to the floor. Eleanor moved with chilling precision, her gaze locking onto Lisa Thompson next. Lisa was sobbing, her body shaking as she crouched behind a table. Eleanor approached her slowly, her weapon raised. Lisa's eyes met hers, filled with a pleading terror that Eleanor had no sense. By the time security personnel arrived, the damage was done and irreversible. The once glamorous event was now a scene of carnage and murder. Guests who had managed to escape gathered outside, their faces pale as they watched firefighters and paramedics swarm the venue. Police officers moved quickly to secure the area, their radios crackling with reports of casualties. Eleanor didn't resist when they apprehended her. She dropped her weapon without a word, her face devoid of emotion. As officers handcuffed her and led her away, she glanced back at the burning building, her lips curling into a faint smile. For the first time in months, she felt at peace. The aftermath of the attack was devastating. 15 people had lost their lives, including Dylan Hayes, Principal Cartwright, and Lisa Thompson. Dozens more were injured, some critically. The city of New York was left reeling, struggling to comprehend how such a calculated act of violence could have occurred. The headlines the next day told the story in stark detail. Disgraced teacher Eleanor Marks orchestrates deadly attack at school gala. The media dissected her life, painting her as both a villain and a victim. Experts debated the warning signs, questioning how someone like her could have gone unnoticed for so long. Eleanor's arrest was the beginning of a media frenzy. Reporters dug into her past, uncovering the details of her dismissal and the events that had led up to the attack. Her former colleagues described her as a dedicated teacher who had become increasingly isolated in the months before her arrest. Students who had once admired her spoke of the drastic change in her demeanor after the accusations surfaced. The trial that followed was one of the most highly publicized in recent history. Eleanor showed no remorse, calmly recounting the injustices she believed she had suffered. She detailed the harassment she had endured from students, the betrayal of her colleagues, and the humiliation of her dismissal. Her defense team argued that years of stress and mental health struggles had driven her to a breaking point, but the prosecution painted a different picture. They described Eleanor as a cold, calculated individual who had meticulously planned her attack. They presented evidence of her online searches, the materials she had purchased, and the journal entries that outlined her motives. The jury listened intently as experts debated whether Eleanor was truly insane or simply consumed by rage. In the end, the verdict was clear. Eleanor was found guilty on all counts, including multiple charges of first-degree murder and terrorism. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a decision that was met with mixed reactions. Some viewed her as a victim of a flawed system, while others saw her as a monster who had taken innocent lives prisoner. Eleanor's story became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the consequences of unchecked anger and despair. In interviews, she spoke candidly about her actions, expressing neither regret nor justification. "They destroyed my life," she said during one chilling interview. "I just returned the favor." As the years passed, the memory of the attack remained fresh in the minds of those who had survived. The families of the victims struggled to move on, their lives forever altered by Eleanor's actions. St. Francis Academy never fully recovered, its reputation tarnished by the tragedy. Eleanor, now a ghost of her former self, spent her days in the confines of a maximum security prison. She rarely spoke to anyone, her once vibrant personality replaced by a quiet, unyielding bitterness. Yet in her mind, she believed she had achieved some form of justice, a thought that both haunted and comforted her in the solitude of her cell. For the rest of New York, the scars of that night served as a reminder of how quickly lives could be shattered. The city, resilient as ever, moved forward, but the memory of Eleanor Marks and her devastating quest for revenge lingered in the shadows of its collective conscience. In the years that followed, the events of that night became the subject of countless documentaries, articles, and books. Some saw Eleanor as a symbol of systemic failure, a woman pushed to the edge by a society that had abandoned her. Others viewed her as a cold-blooded killer, incapable of empathy or remorse. Eleanor, now a shadow of the woman she once was, spent her days in a cell, replaying the events in her mind. She didn't regret what she had done. In her eyes, justice had been served, even if it came at a terrible cost. If you were Eleanor, what would you have done? Drop your thought in the comments below, and if you want more grippy stories like this, make sure to subscribe and join the conversation.